What would happen if the CEO of a whole pizza chain walked into one of his own stores and no one recognized that he was the owner? The night was late, but the lights in Jackson Reeves's office remained on. The dim glow from an old desk lamp cast shadows over scattered papers, dozens of customer reports, internal evaluations, handwritten notes from the customer service department, and complaints cutting through the pride Jackson once had for the pizza chain he had devoted his youth to building. Simple yet haunting phrases. Pizza cold, delivery nearly an hour late, rude, exhausted staff, never coming back. Jackson sat quietly, eyes tired and blurred, yet his mind was clearer than ever. He had believed that a company run on trust and ethics would always be strong. For over a decade, that belief held true. From a small takeout counter on a street corner in Indianapolis, he had grown to over 40 locations across the Midwest. But now, all he saw was something cracking from within. The worst part wasn't the declining numbers, but the growing gap between what the company claimed and what was actually happening on the front lines. Thick reports from Bradley, the regional manager, insisted everything is under control, yet revenue was falling, customers were leaving, and employee turnover was so high the HR department couldn't keep up with hiring replacements. Jackson sighed, wondering when he had lost touch with reality. He knew well that some truths never appear in reports. They only reveal themselves when you actually step into a store, hear a disgruntled customer complain, see the silent exhaustion in employees' eyes, and feel the suffocating tension that numbers alone could never describe. His decision came close to midnight. He wouldn't send emails or call a meeting. Instead, he would return to where it all began, as an ordinary customer. No business cards, no name, no cameras following him. Just a worn baseball cap, hastily bought glasses, and a crumpled hoodie. Jackson didn't know what he would find, but one thing was certain. If there was any chance to save the company, it had to start with the truth. And the truth wasn't found in the executive chair, but backstage in a pizza shop slowly rotting away. The clock on the wall struck 11:45 p.m. as Jackson Reeves finalized his plan. No assistants were notified, no press conferences held. Just a single order placed through the mobile app. A large pepperoni pizza with extra cheese, a dish that had once symbolized the brand he had painstakingly built. The order was sent to branch number 17 in East Indianapolis, the very location with the highest number of complaints last quarter. Strangely, this was also the branch where Bradley had repeatedly claimed, "Just hire a few more staff and things will be fine." But Jackson no longer trusted such comforting words. He dressed simply. Worn jeans, a loose hoodie, reading glasses bought from a drugstore, and an itchy brown wig. He looked like a tired, middle-aged man just off a late shift, craving a simple meal. Estimated delivery time, 30 minutes. He sat silently on an old sofa, eyes fixed on the clock. 30 minutes passed, then 40, then 50. At the 58th minute, Jackson nearly gave up, not just because the pizza seemed increasingly out of reach, but because he felt the very system he had built was betraying its original values. Just then, there was a knock at the door. When it opened, a young man appeared, sweat dripping from his forehead, uniform wrinkled, breath heavy. The name tag read simply, Jason. Though clearly exhausted, Jason forced a faint smile, almost the last courtesy left after a long, grueling shift. "Sorry for being late," he said, voice tired but without excuse. "Tonight, I'm the only one delivering." Jackson remained silent, watching. But those words made him pause. "Just you?" Jason nodded. "There were 3 of us, one called out, one sick. I need the money, so I took it all." Jackson frowned. "Do you get paid overtime?" Jason hesitated, then avoided eye contact. "Technically, yes, but management cuts hours afterward, so it doesn't exceed limits. They say it's company policy." Those words hit Jackson like a punch to the gut. That wasn't company policy. It was systemic deception, and Jason, the young man trying to do the right thing, was living proof of a system in decay. Jackson was no longer hungry, but he knew he was beginning to see the truth he sought. And once again, this story was becoming more personal than ever. The next morning, as the sunlight gently filtered through Jackson's window, he was ready. No disguise this time, no hat, no glasses, no baggy jacket. Just an old dark blue t-shirt, jeans, and a low-slung baseball cap. Not to hide, but to blend quietly into the space. Today he wasn't here to conceal himself, but to witness with the barest eyes. When his car stopped in front of store number 17, the parking lot was nearly empty, and the building looked faded, with a flickering sign due to a broken bulb yet to be replaced. He stepped inside. The familiar but weary scents of baked cheese, fermenting dough, and frying grease mingled in the air. No one was at the front counter. It took nearly a minute before a young woman appeared, expressionless, no greeting, no eye contact. Her name tag read, Alyssa. Jackson softly said, "I'll have a pizza and a soda." Alyssa just nodded, punched it into the register, and handed him the receipt along with a paper cup, still without a word. Jackson sat in a corner near the kitchen door, where he could observe unnoticed. Then a shout came from behind the kitchen door. "This dough is a joke! How many times do I have to tell you?" A man's hoarse, loud and repressed voice echoed through the thin walls. He didn't need to see the face to know who it was. Rick Turner, the branch manager, the same one Bradley once said was doing his best. A young employee nervously apologized, hands shaking as he poured out the dough, threatened to start over or just go home. No guidance, no correction, only insults. The atmosphere was tense like a stretched string. Then Jason appeared. Jackson saw him almost collapsing from yesterday's shift. Still wearing the same old shirt, eyes dark and heavy, moving slowly as if carrying the whole pizza shop on his shoulders. Jason barely grabbed a bottle of water before Rick caught him. "You're late." Jason blinked, clearly flustered. "My shift starts at noon." Rick raised an eyebrow. "I told you to be here at 11, or are you calling me a liar now?" Silence swept the room like a vacuum. Jason froze. No one spoke up. No one intervened. But they didn't know that just a few steps away, the man sitting quietly in the corner, someone Rick had never recognized, was Jackson Reeves, the founding CEO of the entire pizza chain. And he had heard enough. Jackson stood up slowly but firmly. His eyes never left Rick Turner's for a single moment. No one in the restaurant noticed his movement until he approached the counter and spoke clearly, not shouting but loud enough to silence the entire space. "I need you to explain why you treat employees like that." Rick spun around, frowning irritably. "Who are you? If you're unhappy, call customer service." Jackson didn't respond. slowly removed his baseball cap, and looked Rick straight in the eyes. The whole restaurant seemed to freeze as Alyssa suddenly recognized that face, the one they had seen in internal news but never expected to appear here. Rick stepped back half a step, mouth agape, his face going pale. You're Reeves? I didn't know it was you." Jackson cut him off, voice firm like steel wrapped in velvet. "You didn't know. And that is the problem. Because if I'm not here, what I just saw will keep happening, and no one will speak up." In that moment, power completely shifted. Rick was no longer the one controlling the atmosphere, but the one trembling at the eye of the storm. Jackson didn't yell or threaten, but every word he spoke struck everyone like an indictment. He turned to Rick and said just 2 short words. "Office, now." Rick lowered his head and mumbled, "Yes, sir," and walked away as if each step was a burden. Meanwhile, Jason stood frozen, bottle of water in hand, and Alyssa stared at the computer screen, barely daring to breathe. The office behind the counter was a damp, cluttered room with flickering fluorescent lights, long overdue for replacement. Rick spun around, trying to regain composure, but his voice still trembled. "I didn't know you would drop by today." Jackson didn't reply immediately, just looked Rick straight in the eyes and said, "And that's exactly the problem. If I have to show up for people to behave decently, then you're not a manager, you're an actor." Rick started to justify. "Employees are lazy, shifts are short, staffed. Everyone demands, but no one tries." But Jackson had heard these excuses hundreds of times. "I don't see any leadership in you. I see a grown boy abusing power." Then he ended the conversation coldly and clearly. "You're fired, effective immediately." Rick was stunned. "You can't just replace me and hope things get better." Jackson nodded, voice low but sharp as a blade. "You're right. Replacing you isn't the solution. But it's a start." He left the office, leaving Rick standing alone in what moments ago was his territory. But for Jackson, the real confrontation had only just begun. The air outside the office was so quiet that the soft hum of the pizza oven could be heard in the background. As Jackson stepped out, all eyes turned to him, not with the skepticism or indifference of the morning, but with a mix of confusion and hope. Rick Turner had just been fired in front of them, swiftly, decisively, without any excuse. But what stunned everyone wasn't the action itself, but the reason behind it, because the boss had seen enough and chose to stand with them. Jason still stood near the cooler, holding an unopened bottle of water, his eyes cautiously fixed on Jackson, disbelief mixed with hesitation. Alyssa quietly turned her head, her hands still poised over the keyboard, as if any small movement might shatter everything. Jackson looked at every face, nodding slightly as a confirmation. "I'll be brief. This store has been operating wrong for too long. As of today, that ends." No one immediately responded. The announcement, though clear and firm, was still hard to believe. Alyssa spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid to break the fragile atmosphere. "You mean he's really been fired?" Jackson nodded. "Yes, and what happens from now on will be different." Jason shifted slightly, as if an invisible burden had been lifted, but his eyes were still full of doubt. "How different?" he asked. Jackson looked him in the eye. No more cutting hours to avoid paying overtime. No more yelling at employees like they're disposable. And no one will be left alone to carry the entire store. The silence now was no longer fear, but focus. Those who had once worked like shadows were beginning to listen. Jackson took a deep breath. I'm not here to give a speech and walk away. I'll be working here all day today. I want to see how the work really gets done. And I want to hear each one of you. Jason raised his eyebrows, unable to hide his surprise. You'll work with us? Jackson nodded. Starting right now. There was a moment of stillness, and then, as if the tension of the entire morning suddenly released, Jason let out a soft laugh. Not polite, but genuine. Tired but warm. And so the owner of the entire pizza chain stepped behind the counter, rolled up his sleeves, took the receipt from Alyssa, and turned to Jason. 1 cheese pizza. Show me how you make it. Jason hesitated, but then nodded, walked to the fridge to grab the dough, and began guiding the owner through the process of kneading it. The story didn't end there. But that day, for the first time in many years, Jackson no longer saw himself as a CEO. He saw himself as part of the team, and that changed everything. From behind the kitchen counter, the sound of dough hitting the table mixed with the scent of flour and cheese filled the entire kitchen. Jason moved skillfully, each motion etched into his muscles, while Jackson watched intently, occasionally asking quiet questions to ensure he understood the process correctly. There was no supervising manager, no KPI charts on the wall, just genuine workers and a boss relearning from scratch, step by step, motion by motion, feeling the first pizza stick awkwardly to the edge of the table, and Jason chuckling softly. Not bad, for a newbie. Jackson smiled too, a relieved smile after weeks of stress. But he wasn't there just to learn how to make pizza. He was there to feel what the reports never told. Throughout that afternoon, he helped pack pizzas, answered phones, carried orders out to delivery vehicles. He even accompanied Jason on 2 deliveries, one to the home of a couple with a newborn, where the mother whispered thanks when Jason brought the food inside, instead of leaving it at the door. The second was to an elderly man's apartment, who slipped Jason a handful of coins and said, "You're the only one who knocked and smiled." Each moment was a genuine snapshot, not of a system operating, but of human beings. When they returned to the store, Jackson called the team together in the dining area. The soft yellow overhead lights reflected on the flour, still dusting his sleeves, and no one kept the distance they had in the morning. He stood near the soda counter, voice clear and firm. "I've seen enough to know you're giving more than you're getting back. So from now on, there will be changes." All eyes turned to him. 1, all overtime will be fully paid, no exceptions. 2, we'll hire more people. Jason can't handle all the deliveries alone, and the kitchen can't run short, staffed every week. 3, I will find a new manager, someone who truly respects you, and until then, I'll be coming back regularly. A young employee at the back nervously asked, You really will come back?" Jackson smiled. "I built this company from scratch, and now it's time to rebuild the most important thing, its culture." And for the first time in months, store number 17 was not just lit up, it was glowing with hope. The next morning, before the first light of dawn touched the rooftop, Jackson was already standing outside store number 17. No longer entering as a stranger or disguised customer, he stood there as someone rebuilding the foundation of his own cherished creation. Inside, the scent of freshly mixed dough, tomato sauce, and sautéed onions gently filled the air. Jason was checking the delivery bags by zone codes. Alyssa was slicing vegetables, and Trey, the quiet prep cook from the day before, was rolling dough with a focus Jackson had never seen before. He stood still for a long moment, watching them work without the fear that had gripped them previously. Then he stepped inside and called Jason's name. "Have you ever thought about becoming a manager?" Jason startled and turned around. "Me? No. I never thought I was cut out for that. I just try to survive each shift." Jackson smiled but didn't reply right away, instead watching him closely before saying, "You worked alone on deliveries, showed up on time the next day, spoke the truth when insulted. People like that should be the leaders." Jason was silent, glancing around the store, where just days ago he had thought about quitting, but now things were different. Alyssa was smiling, chatting with Trey, no longer the cold girl who used to keep her head down behind the counter. The atmosphere was no longer thick with fear, but filled with laughter, thanks, and trusting looks. Jason slowly replied, "If I accept, I need to know that things will really change. I don't want to be the one keeping alive what made this place so bad." Jackson didn't hesitate. "You'll have a direct line to me. No intermediaries, no departments. If something's wrong, you tell me. Clear and transparent." Jason thought for a few seconds, then nodded. This time, he needed no further reassurance. When he shook Jackson's hand, he was no longer the exhausted delivery boy. It was the handshake of someone rising up, not just for himself, but for the whole team. And with that nod, a new chapter quietly but firmly began. Store 17 was starting to change, not just through actions, but through truly listening people. In the weeks that followed, store number 17 began to transform little by little, not through grand declarations or pressure from the board, but through the quiet yet persistent presence of Jackson and the steady leadership of Jason. Jackson wasn't there every day, but he came often enough for everyone to know he wasn't just dropping by and disappearing like so many other leaders. He helped fold pizza boxes, wiped tables, assisted in the kitchen rolling dough, and sometimes just sat quietly in a corner observing and taking notes. Jason, the young man who once hesitated to accept the role, now coordinated the work naturally. He didn't give orders, but asked before suggesting, listened before making decisions. He remembered every face on the shift, knew who was skilled in the kitchen, who was quick at the counter, and who was still shy and needed extra support. No one taught him how to lead, but he understood because he had once been left behind. New staff were hired, orders were distributed evenly, and no one had to run deliveries for the entire district alone anymore. Shifts no longer dragged silently into the late night. The change was not loud, but it was clear, like a new breath weaving through every minute of operation. Customers began leaving positive feedback. "Service is so much more pleasant. It feels like everyone truly cares about their work. This used to be the place I hated most. Now it's the only place I trust." One day, while Jackson was sitting near the window reading sales reports, Jason approached and gently placed a pizza box on the table. Not an order. From the whole team. A simple gesture. But it's a thank you to you. On the box was a handwritten note in black ink. Thank you for listening." Jackson opened the lid. A gentle warmth spread out, carrying the familiar scent of flour, cheese, and the most important thing, the revival. He looked around. Alyssa was helping an elderly customer choose a combo. Trey was teasing a new employee, awkwardly rolling dough. And Jason returned to the kitchen station, tomato sauce on his sleeve, eyes full of focus. Jackson understood. The thing he once thought lost had come back. Not the company, not the revenue, but the people. And he promised himself he would hold on to it with everything he still had. Early the next morning, Jason arrived before opening time. He wasn't scheduled, and no one asked him to come, but he showed up anyway. He checked the dough, oven temperature, and organized delivery bags, not out of obligation, but because he had begun to feel a true responsibility for this place. Alyssa and Trey worked calmly, no longer startled or hesitant as before. At opening time, Jason moved smoothly between the counter, computer, and kitchen. When a new employee struggled with the cash register, he gently guided them without blame. When a new delivery driver didn't know how to organize bags, he patiently showed the steps again. Mid-shift, Jackson appeared, wearing an apron, silently helping fold boxes. The two exchanged only a nod. No need for words, as trust had become routine. Later, when two employees clashed over a duplicate order, Jason didn't scold, but listened and resolved the issue within minutes. Everyone returned to work as if nothing had happened. Jackson stood near the soda counter, nodding softly. In that moment, he knew. The person who once thought about leaving this store was now the one holding it steady. That evening, after closing time, Jackson invited everyone to stay for a short meeting. No one was forced, yet no one left. They stood in a small circle near the counter, the warm light reflecting on their tired but relieved faces. Jackson held no papers, just looked at each person and said, "I want to thank you all. This store is getting better, and that's because of you." His gaze paused on Jason, especially the one who didn't give up. Jason hesitated. "I just didn't want things to get worse." Jackson nodded. Sometimes leadership begins with that. Everyone looked at Jason. Their eyes changed. When the meeting ended, they left slowly, greeting each other warmly. Jason stayed behind, tidying the kitchen out of habit, folding chairs, wiping counters, adjusting the trash bin. Jackson waited at the door. "Ready to go?" he asked. Jason nodded. They stepped outside into the cool night. Jackson quietly said, "If one day you see this place slipping again, just tell me. No need to go through anyone else." Jason stopped, looked at him. "You'll really listen?" Jackson smiled. "I already have, haven't I?" And Jason knew. This place truly belonged to him now. In the business world, it's not the payroll or revenue that reflects the health of an organization, but how people are treated when no one is watching. Jackson didn't just fix a store. He restored the core values across the entire system: trust and the right to speak up. If you believe that a true leader is someone who dares to step down, listen, and take action, please like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss inspiring stories like this, and leave a comment with the phrase, "For the people," to let us know you still believe that change begins with respect.